Thanks for that introduction. I welcome you to our panel today on transparency and inclusive co-management for sustainable fisheries in Africa.
A presentation by the director of Mainuma Sharif, who will speak to us on is urbanization a challenge or an opportunity for a greener world? As you know, UN Habitat very much focuses on master planning and policy development. This is followed by Grete Faremo, the head of UNOPS, the UN Office for Project Services, that does things on the ground. And then Mainuma again, what does it take to bring these solutions to scale? So having these two people, Mainuma and Grete, is a great combination. Those who plan and those who operate. Now, this is followed by a discussion with Yvonne AKI-SAWYERR, the mayor of Freetown in Sierra Leone, Siamphone Seng Chandala, the Laos Director-General for Climate Change in the Ministry for Natural Resources and the Environment, and then the mayor of Braga, Ricardo Rio, who's very involved in the Global Parliament of Mayors, and finally an interesting young man from Accra called Pa Kwesi Boni. There will be an opportunity to ask the panelists questions. Now, just a friendly reminder to our speakers, we've asked everyone to give sharp, brief answers to the questions, and I'll ask each person one question, because what we really want is an exchange, and there'll be many opportunities to intervene. So thanks for that. And I'm Charles Landry, I'm moderating this. I'm, I suppose, associated with developing the idea of the creative city, which in one sentence is, in a world of dramatic change, how do you create the conditions for people to think, act and plan imaginatively in creating opportunities and solving really complex problems? Anyway, now to some Slido questions. We really want to know where you all come from. And our colleague Stefania will launch these now. So let's see that happen, ideally. Is the question coming? I can see all my co-speakers. And there we are. Let's see if it's coming up. A little bit of a blip. I'll wait another 10 seconds, and if it doesn't come up, we'll just assume you come from all over the world. And you certainly come from Africa, Yvonne, and you certainly come from Asia, Siamphone. And Braga, as everybody knows, is in Portugal. All right, okay, let's just assume we've got a very diverse audience, and let's love that fact that we're coming from all over the world. So now what I'd like to start off with is the presentations from Mainuma and Grete. If you could launch these, please, colleagues in Brussels.
Excellencies, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start by thanking the European Commission, the panelists, and all the participants for joining what promises to be a very stimulating debate on the role of cities in the achievement of the Green Agenda. As a former mayor of Penang Island City Council, I have seen how fragile ecosystems and public health can be affected by urban growth, air pollution, and unsustainable consumption of resources. Growth in urban population, physical expansion, and material consumptions can be managed if we have integrated planning. This is planning that is future-oriented, using greenhouse gas emission as a key indicator to measure and regulate development. Globally, urban growth is rapid and unequal. As far back as 2003, UN Habitat highlighted in its Challenge Slums report that an estimated 2 billion people will be living in slums by 2030 if there is no new social contract that takes into account equality and the environment. Unfortunately, this prediction has come true a decade earlier. In numerous countries, such as Bangladesh, Tanzania, and Nigeria, cities are doubling in population every 10 or 15 years, and there is a significant risk that unplanned, rapid urban expansion may undo national efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and the new urban agenda. In the 2020 World Cities Report, entitled The Value of Urbanization, UN Habitat highlighted the need for cities and governments to take into account environmental value when measuring development. We need a radical shift away from only relying on gross national development or GNP as a measure of progress. Cities themselves are not the issue. It is how they are planned, designed, managed, and governed that will define the quality of life of our cities. I know from experience that when cities have effective, transparent, and accountable institutions, when they invest in efficient infrastructure, they become the locus of economic growth. They promote social emancipation and justice, and they care for people and for the planet. So, the urban transition can be an opportunity to change the way cities are organized, to leapfrog to more sustainable infrastructure and deliver on the green transition. 70% of all the infrastructure in 2030 is yet to be built. So decision makers need to realize that they have the power to either support resilient, equality, and low carbon development by the decision they make today. Their indecision or lack of conviction will deprive future generations for a better future. It is really that simple. Let me now hand over to my good friend Grita Paremo, the Executive Director of UNOPS, to tell us more about the role of urban infrastructure.
Thank you to my friend Maimouna Sharif, the Executive Director of UN Habitat, for beautifully setting the scene here. And allow me also to thank the European Commission, the panelists, and our participants for this important conversation on how cities can drive a sustainable future. Cities, as you have just heard, present both a challenge and an opportunity for a greener world. They are responsible for a large portion of the world's energy demand and produce most of our greenhouse gas emissions. Yet, cities are also major drivers of change, and here lies the opportunity to build a more sustainable, inclusive, and resilient future. Urban infrastructure is key to this transformation. Infrastructure is central to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. It is also a key component of climate mitigation and adaptation efforts. Yet, as things stand now, our cities and the infrastructure that supports them are ill-equipped to cope with shocks and stresses from a changing climate to pandemics, as the COVID-19 crisis has shown us. This will worsen inequalities. It will lead to decades of development gains being lost. We have a unique opportunity to change this now. Quality urban infrastructure is key to making cities more sustainable, inclusive, and resilient. It connects populations with each other and to education and job opportunities. It drives economic growth and can help reduce income inequality. Infrastructure plays an important role in building a greener future for our cities. Greener infrastructure supports not just sustainability and resilience, but also greener health and well-being for residents. Urban infrastructure is built to last. If we build without considering the needs of an uncertain future, we have failed our cities. Good governance is key. If cities are to tackle climate change, governments need to make the right infrastructure choices now. At this junction, they need to tap into the immense potential of their public procurement budgets to accelerate the shift to lower carbon economies while creating jobs and championing a more sustainable and inclusive recovery from the pandemic. Cities are a key part of our journey to build back better and get back on the path towards achieving these sustainable development goals. The time to act is now. Together, we can build a better future for all.
As you can hear, we are in total agreement on the needs to address both the social and environmental challenges of sustainable urbanization before cities get locked into a high consumption and unjust development pathways. We have to take bold steps to establish a new social contract as the basis for building back better from the pandemic. This is a commitment from all of us to reduce poverty and inequality, provide adequate housing, and strengthen social protection while rebuilding from the pandemic. At UN Habitat, we recognize that this means 1. Rethinking the form and function of the city. 2. Addressing systemic poverty and inequalities in cities. 3. Rebuilding a new normal urban economy. And 4. Refining urban legislation and governance arrangement. The challenge is to scale up this awareness and commitment to make the new urban agenda a reality in the thousands of cities that exist on the planet, to localize the SDGs and ensure that rapid urbanization becomes a story of social justice and a renewed contract with nature. Thank you for your attention.
Right. Don't you love the complexities of a digitizing world? Yes. Anyway, look, thank you very much, Mainuma and Greta. I mean, the essence of that was really globally urban growth is unequal and obviously very rapid. And this risks a lot of the things that we want to do in implementing the SDGs and so on. I now really want to hand over to start with perhaps Yvonne. Now, Yvonne, as you know, if you don't know, you need to know that she was an amazing person in dealing with the Ebola crisis. So she knows about crisis, I can tell you. Anyway, but let's go to the question I want to ask you, because I heard that you are taking various actions in Freetown, and one which is all about the green transition. But one, I thought your ambitious tree planting campaign was actually fabulous when I read about it. Can you just tell us a bit more about that? That would be great.
Thanks very much, James. As Maimouna and Greta both mentioned, as we see this growth of population, there's a real risk that gains will be lost. And part of the reason for this is the loss of greening. And that brings with it a series of challenges. Besides the fact that we are reducing our carbon sink, we are also at the same time, in our case, as a city that's nestled between the mountains and the sea, we're also at increased risk of landslides, increased risks of water shortages, as we see the catchment areas become exposed to the sun. So the plan for Freetown, the Tree Town, which is the name of our million tree planting campaign, is to reverse that. So it's part of the broader urban management or the integrated approach to urban development that we have represented in our plan Transform Freetown. And it's one of our first targets. We've got 19 targets. It's one of the early targets. I think it's the second target, which is to ensure that 50% vegetation, we have an increase, 50% increase in vegetation cover in the city. What's unique about Freetown, the Tree Town, is that we're not just planting trees. we're growing trees. And by this I mean that we're ensuring the community are engaged. So it's a green investment. There are jobs created. We have tree stewards who can be volunteers, but we also have tree growers. We have over 500 young people who care for the trees. The trees are tagged and they're tracked using an app. So we follow their growth, and payment to the tree growers is based on the growth of the trees. So there's no getting away from it. And we have this all on a platform, so you can log in and you can find each and every one of our trees. The trees also provide economic benefits to those in the community. So where we're planting in open communities, we ask for their involvement, their choice in trees. So we've got economic trees, mangoes, sweet and sour sop, moringa, different trees. So it's not just a question of here's a tree to ensure that we try to roll back on the deforestation, but here's a tree that is creating jobs, but is also providing economic benefits to those in the communities. And these are not without their challenges, because we're in an environment where 82% of cooking fuel in our city is actually from wood. So the trees are under constant threat. And we have a twin track approach of trying to push forward with alternative cooking fuels, with clean cooking alternatives, so that there is a move. And it's a very gradual process. The investment into the trees has come ahead of the investment into the alternative cooking fuels. So we've got a tension there, but it's a tension that we're able to address through extensive community engagement and community ownership and buy-in.
Didn't realize it was that complex, and I love the connection between this sort of digitizing world that you've operated. So it's not just let's just plant a tree, off we go. Thank you very much, Yvonne. That was really inspiring. Now over to you, Siamphon Seng Chandala. I understand that you've been working quite a lot to increase resilience to climate change, impacts on residents of informal settlements. Why is this work so important to Laos, and what have you been able to achieve, or what are you trying to achieve? Perhaps you could tell us a bit about that. That would be great.
Okay. Thank you. I think important of work. I think urbanization in Laos is growing at the unprecedentedly rapid pace from 27% in 2005 to 33% in 2015. If it continues to the increase at that current rate, is estimated that by 2030, nearly 50% of the country's population will be the urban area. While the lack of the data of the nature hazards and the impact of the climate change in the country pose the challenge to understand the gravity of the situation. It is understood that climate change exacerbated the existing vulnerability, such as the lack of the access to the basic services like water, sanitation, and hygiene, or waste in the many unplanned and vulnerability settlement. Therefore, it is important that we are proactive about identifying the case of the vulnerability, such as the climate change, and reduce the vulnerability through increase the understanding of the threat and the impact of the climate change, and implement the policy to address them. That's the important work, I think. But for the achievement, data collection and analysis, vulnerability and risk assessment developed together with the UN Habitats, reversed that in the 2019, almost 3 million people across nearly 2,000 villages in the country suffers the impact of drought and floods. As the present, we also facing on the flood in some provinces as well. So the aims implement small-scale intervention for the resilience of these villages to the increased climate change resilience. Mainstream climate change into the policy and plan at the local provinces and the national level, since being a step ahead in assistance to the reduced vulnerable and diminish risk. So I think that from my initiative to respond to your question, I hope
thank you very much. No, that's great. I mean, quite clearly, you're trying to keep ahead of the game and learn from the best, so you don't have to sort of go through the problems that many others have gone through. Can I now turn to Ricardo? Ricardo, you're based in Braga, Portugal, a beautiful city, of course. Now, there's this EU Green Accord, whose aim is to make EU cities greener, cleaner, healthier, all the beautiful things in life. Now, in your opinion, what do you think, what sort of progress has been made in your view, looking at it from where you stand?
Well, first of all, let me greet you, Charles. It's always a pleasure to meet you again. Also, my dear colleague, Yvonne AKI-SAWYERR from the Global Parliament of Mayors, the rest of the members of this panel, the ones that are following this initiative, and also a greeting and thank you for the invitation to me and to Braga to participate in this panel. As you mentioned, the Green City Accord is a very important strategic document in which we try to mobilize local leaders to addressing in their own policies, in their territories, the questions of the sustainability, of improving the, let me say, the quality of life of their citizens by obviously addressing specific areas which are challenges for the urban development in each of the territories, no matter if you are talking about a city in Europe, in South America, or in Asia. Actually, the geographic may be different, but the challenges are quite similar. And what we have been noticing worldwide is that there is a stronger role and a stronger proactiveness by the local leaders in addressing these issues. For instance, when we look at the Sustainable Development Goals that are promoted by the United Nations, and for which I have recently been the rapporteur in the European Committee of the Regions to an opinion that wants to push forward the commitment at the European level to this topic as well. Mostly 65% of the goals can only be achieved with direct engagement of local authorities. And therefore, I think that this is a way to show that local leaders are committed to these topics, have a common strategy that can be, as it was mentioned at the beginning of this panel, replicated, and in which there are best practices that can be learned from one another. And at the same time, there are obviously specific initiatives that are addressing topics that are very important. In a city like Braga, mobility and sustainable mobility is a crucial issue. We have a lot of dependency on the use of vehicles by the citizens. We want to foster the use of public transport, to have a greener public transport. We have been renewing our fleet of buses in recent years to electric buses, to compressed gas, natural gas buses. We are, for instance, preparing in the upcoming years a complete revolution in the public transport system by introducing the bus rapid transit as a mean of direct and access transport in the center of the city. And at the same time, we have to know that this, let's say, multi-stakeholder and multi-governance approach to these issues can also be a way to foster the recovery that is so needed in a context like the one that we live now after the pandemic, or almost after the pandemic, and at the same time to value the economic dimension of this green digital approach, in which we can use the new businesses, the new opportunities that this Green Deal, for instance, at the European level also allows, as a way to create new job opportunities and new ways to foster the development in each of the territories. And therefore, I think that to have a document like the Green City Accord, in which we all commit to these goals, and also it was something that was mentioned before that I think is very important, also put ourselves available to monitorize the fulfillment of those goals. It's not only about committing, but it's also about action and about assessing the results of our action.
Yeah, thanks, Ricardo. I mean, what strikes me is that obviously, in a way, national governments define the rule systems and incentive systems often, but it's cities where really the action happens, because you are so much closer to citizens. And if there's garbage on the street, or if it's not very pleasant, you as mayors are told, "What are you doing, Yvonne? What are you doing, Ricardo?" You can't avoid that. You know, they probably see you on the street. So that's a very clear message. Now I want to turn to a young man who I think is extremely interesting, young, ambitious, committed, who set up something called Kids City in Accra. But his other interest is about sanitation, waste, and recycling. And I was really impressed by your energy. Now, what do you think about all of this? Do the older generation, for example, in Accra, take these issues as seriously as you do? And if not, what are you going to do, you younger people, to make them listen?
Thank you very much. Well, this is an interesting question. I'd like to start by saying my practical experience in 2018 made me realize that health and then the climate action are linked, especially in urban cities, where, for instance, we went to the Anomle community, a community in Accra, Ghana, where the area happened to be suffering from a cholera epidemic at the time. So in our effort to help them, we engaged in a community health work initiative, but we realized that the main problem wasn't that they didn't know how to practice sanitation, but at every juncture, there was waste dump sites created, because in those cities, they happen not to have urban planning. And that's something that the generation before us happened to engage in. Because so you find that every juncture, in schools, in marketplaces, in their homes, at the backyard, they don't have proper waste disposal practices. And that's something that I feel our generation could better help through awareness creation campaigns to sensitize people on the ways in which we can segregate waste at source. That is, separate plastic waste from organic waste. And then at the disposal sites, we then send it out to processing centers, which will help reprocess the plastic waste for our benefit. So mainly our organization has been engaged in sensitizing people on how best to practice waste segregation at source. Thank you.
No, that's good. Are your politicians listening to you? Are they saying, "Wow, these young people are really getting their act together"? I want to know that, please.
Well, it's been a bit of for me as well, part of my role, I work with government as well. Well, they have been supportive to some extent, but there's also that bit of it with the contestations of dam sites. With government playing a major role in this crisis, we believe that if government is able to sit down and decide that, hey, for this particular city or community, this is a centralized dump site location we're allocating to you. And at source, we segregate the waste and help you process it. But unfortunately, we don't have enough processing plants, plastic waste processing plants within the country. And currently, the Ministry of Environment, Science and Technology has come out with a policy that will help us better segregate waste, but it's left with the implementation. But also notably is that the government has started a tree planting situation, just like how my senior guest on the panel has indicated in her country. They have started. Our project is, our ambitious goal is to plant 5 million trees in our country.
1 million, 5 million. We love it. Yes. Can I come back to you, Yvonne, if that's okay? I mean, clearly, you know, gender equality and climate change are connected in many ways. And obviously, you think it's important involving women in that and looking at the world through a gender-sensitive lens. Can you just explain a bit the type of things you've been able to do that in that respect, please?
Right, thanks. So there's a range of things. And I think perhaps the starting point is to just recognize that we all know that when there are disasters, the burden inevitably falls on women. Many of them are leading households on their own, are responsible for, you know, sort of feeding their families, you know, educating their children, and dealing with, and therefore dealing with the consequences of disasters. So it's been important for us. We've done a number of things. It's been important for us to have women at the table in all of our planning. So we as part of my role in C40 Cities, I'm on a group called Women for Climate, and we did a competition here, and were able to identify women who had ideas, visions for things they could do within their own communities. So that's one specific thing we do. We mentor women who are working on climate interventions. The other thing we do, which touches on what Pakwesi was just saying, when it comes to sanitation, we've also really seen the significance of, or the importance of making sure that waste collection is decentralized. So we don't have fancy big trucks for household waste collection. We have tricycles, and those tricycles have carts at the back of them, and they're run by community people, by youth in you know, for the most part. We don't discriminate. We do have some older people, but I would say 95% of the tricycle operators are young people, and we make a policy that at least 30% of them must be women. So that's providing employment for women. In addition to the tree planting, there's another sort of greening intervention we have, which is much more directly linked to food sustainability, and that's supporting urban farmers. And these are targeting exclusively women. So over the course, well, just last week, we extended this to 200 more women-led households. But in November, we had already reached out and provided, with UN Habitat funding support, I must add, and recognize that, we had already provided 300. That was with EU funding. So a combination now of 500 women-led households who are farming within their communities, backyard farming, so help with tools, with seeds, with equipment, planting boxes where these are appropriate, and really with training as well. So this is adding to green, but in a manner where it's also adding to nutrition, food, food, but nutritious food, and economic growth. When it comes to disaster risk reduction, it's been really important for us to also invest in improved drainage, increased drainage. It's not enough. This question of urban management is really at the heart of everything. As Edie Maimuna said at the start of this session, if we don't plan our cities right, then what you end up with is a growth of slums. We're in a position in Freetown where we're sort of trying to move from a place where 35% of our residents are living in slums, trying to move to improving, as our Slum Dwellers Association would say, take the slum out of the people and not the people out of the slum. So we're trying to bring in sanitation, drainage, and on that point of women, even with our drainage work, and we've done some of this in collaboration with UNOPS as an operating partner, even with our drainage works, we get community involved, and we insist that we have a percentage of those who receive the skills and then do the work, that a percentage of them are women. I think we worked on a 20 or 25% female involvement. So it's about women helping to design. It's about women implementing design. And it's about actually just ensuring that what we're building speaks to the needs of women, whether it's improving the quality of community healthcare centers, or indeed something as basic, well, not basic, something as foundational and fundamental as introducing mass transit as a cable car system that will connect communities, improve access to jobs, improve the value of property through investment in the stations and so forth. I think everything one does, if one is thinking clearly about what you're trying to achieve, so that you don't disenfranchise women, will always contribute very positively to society. And that's what we've sought to do.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, what I also like is your sort of 360-degree perspective. You start somewhere, but the way you define a project automatically does many things at the same time. And for me, the definition of a creative project is you do one thing that has multiple impacts simultaneously on various things. So thank you very much on that. Now, Ricardo, I know you've thought a lot about multi-stakeholder governance and all of these types of issues. Now, what's the way forward, looking at it from a sort of city perspective? I mean, what do you think the key questions are that let's say, the UN or others need to address? Difficult question, I know.
And it's not something that is difficult to agree on, let's say, more theoretical perspective. The big challenge is to make it practical and to have really capacity to engage and to mobilize all the institutions, all the citizens in each of the contexts. And I think that I'm in the end of my second term here in Braga, and I used to say that one of my biggest legacies will be the capacity that we had here in the city to establish a new governance model for the city in which all the local stakeholders are clearly aligned. There's not a public imposed vision for each of the areas of the city. And we always try to bring the best of each of us, either the universities, the companies, the social institutions, the cultural agents, whatever it may be, to each of the projects. Also in that perspective that you were mentioning of having also a view that each area can have connections with other domains in the life of the city and the citizens. And I think that is something that is more difficult as we grow in the hierarchy of the administration. It's easier to do it at the city level than it is at the national level. It looks like it's easier at the national level than it is at the European level. For instance, as I mentioned before on that opinion on the SDGs, one of the topics that we defended and that I proposed was the reinstatement of a multi-stakeholders platform in which the European Union and the European Commission could have a direct interaction with many, many institutions from the civil society that are developing very interesting projects in the area of sustainability. And I think that to foster that engagement and to create conditions that, in a sense, for instance, if you use the financial union instruments and if you value in those opportunities the collaboration approach and the projects that engage more than one institution, that is a way to make things happen, and obviously to in the practice to have an approach that leads to those goals that we are pursuing.
Yeah, I mean, what strikes me there is that we're really talking about the collective intelligence of a city. And given that collective intelligence can perhaps make 1 + 1 = 3, ideally, you're likely to be much more effective. But I think what it requires, and I think what you're saying, and I think what you've done in Braga has really generated an environment of trust, a mutual respect between the different partners. And that obviously is not easy to do initially because someone, I don't know, we have cliches and prejudices about each other. But I suppose the main point that you're all saying, and I'm reading that also from our Lao friends and Yvonne, is you need some sort of sense that there is a vision, there's a story. Look, this is what we're after, and we can all benefit. Siamphon, another little question to you. It's just a simple one. You're from national government here. How have you been able to get the local authorities involved in your conversations?
Let me share some experience how we integrate our local involvement of this. We are constantly developing and conducting the capacity building activity at the local and national to the increase awareness and engage all level of the government and relevant stakeholders in the climate change discussion. And then the Samsung system in Laos, for example, has been implemented to promote decentralization and strengthen the capacity at the local levels. Thus, we are actively promoting cross-sector vertical integration to better tackle the issue that impact the most vulnerable communities, such as the climate change. We are also working closely with the government department to integrate the climate change and the human settlement issue into the urban development strategy. Last but not least, we also acknowledge that the government officers across the country need to be better equipped to mitigate and respond to the climate change. In this regard, we have engaged several climate change related projects with the UN Habitat and other international partners, including capacity building, as mentioned earlier.
Okay, thank you very much. Now a question perhaps that all of you can think about, but I'm passing the baton like a relay race. I'm sorry. Okay, back to Yvonne. Here we are. Okay, how important is public procurement in what you do in fostering the green transition and, let's say, putting green criteria into that? Have you done work on that side?
It's a real opportunity, and it's one that where I was listening to Siphon just now, the national, local, coming from the national level. It's one where we are challenged at the local level to be able to put in policies like that, because they have to go through the national parliament. So we have drafted a policy which would require 20, I think it's 25%, I can't remember the exact percentage, of building materials used by the city to be green. Either we've been working on the concept of using some sort of recycled material element into it, but we can't go it alone. All of our procurement has to be approved by national government. So procurement is important. It really can drive, whether it's in terms of sort of the use of solar lighting. But then again, I should say this. Then again, we also need to have the boldness and the finance to support the growth of these sectors, and that's not something which can be done purely from the city level. So procurement is important. Have we been able to really build it in? No, because we can't go it alone, and we haven't yet. The government hasn't gotten there. I know that they are talking about it, but let's see where we get to.
But in a funny way, your bicycles, and you talked about the tricycles. In a way, that's also procurement. You could call it procurement, because you're saying, off we go, 25% women. You've procured 25% women. I know I'm joking, but I mean, it's also procurement. Have you done anything along those lines, Ricardo?
Yeah, we actually don't have the inclusion of specific criteria for sustainability according to the public tenders that we develop. But obviously, the options that we include in each of the projects are usually connected with sustainability matters. And I think there's a topic that currently is very, very important, and it's also connected with this discussion, is that we take very seriously the idea of not leaving anybody behind. And one of the big challenges that we have to deal is that, for instance, the lowest income households may be obviously in a difficult condition to accompany the renewal of the energy in their buildings, and obviously the question of the urban management, so that we also provide space for pedestrians, for bikes, for more sustainable vehicles. That is something that we always try to include in our policies, that are specific initiatives that help all the citizens to accompany and to participate in this process, because obviously we want to move forward as the whole community and not increasing the distance between each of the citizens.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, what some people say, I'm just picking up the phrase procurement again, that procurement is the secret weapon of the green transition. And I know that sounds a bit like a slogan, but there is some power, I think, in procurement. Now back to you, Pakwesi. I just want to know, you talked about raising awareness, and I think everybody on this panel agrees that we've got to get citizens involved because they help provide some of the solutions we want. How many, in your projects around sanitation, etc., how many young people have you been able to involve?
Okay, so our organization largely depends on volunteers from the universities. So we have a team in different groups. Each group has at least 25 volunteers. So we've been able to meet an average of 12 communities in all, and in all 700 youth have been involved in such our projects. This is actually building awareness of segregation of waste and helping us be able to segregate our waste much better. But now the problem about segregation is the disposal. We lack the centers who would actually recycle this product into new, renewed products for our use. And that's where the problem comes in. So yeah, segregating waste, all right, but now disposing it for recycle has become an issue. Yeah. And then it reverts back to the problem.
Yeah, I'm impressed by the fact that you've got 700 younger people involved. Have other people in Ghana sort of seen what you've done and said, hey, why didn't we copy that? I mean, this is a simple idea. These guys are doing great stuff. Is that true? Have you had any impact in that way?
Yeah, yes, we do. We have a couple of groups, Environment 360, Koliba. All these groups are taking initiative as a result of our action, and they are learning and also doing it. So it's having that multiplier effect, inspiring others. And that's exactly what we seek to do, inspire others to do same to save our planet. Because if, let's say, I can do it as a young person as I am, I can start such an initiative, then you too, you're no different. And it's an inspiring story to others.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat which is quite interesting. I'll throw it at you, which says, has Greta Thunberg had any effect in your countries?
Come again? I didn't hear that, please. Could you repeat the question?
I mean, anyone can answer this question. The Swedish activist, had any impact in your countries?
I think so, yeah. Quite a few, but we're not really... Yeah, I think so. It's
just that this is a question from the chat. I mean, there's another question in the chat, which I think is quite interesting. I'll just read it out. Given all the difficulties of life, for example, in developing countries, does climate change and the way we talk about it sound too abstract? Or is it better to have a sort of real life situation where you say, look, the river is dirty. Let's look at the river and connect people to these issues by something very specific and local. Does anyone want to answer that question from the chat?
Okay.
That Ricardo seems to be moving his mouth, and so does Yvonne.
Well, Yvonne may start.
You start, Yvonne.
Thanks, Ricardo. I think climate change is very real, and the impact of climate change is being felt every day. From rising sea levels to landslides, abnormal weather patterns, loss of crops. Now this year, we have historically had one of the highest levels of rainfall in Sub-Saharan Africa, the Met Agency announced this year that we're going to have below average rainfall, which is going to mean water shortages. And then when we do have the rain, we have it in really, it comes with really serious storms. In 2017, we lost 1,000 people in 5 minutes with a mudslide, a landslide. So climate change is real. And the language is the language. If the language the language links back to, for us, what we must do about adaptation and mitigation. It's not so much, I see where the person's coming from. It's less about messages. You don't couch the messages in the same way, but you've got to give the messages because climate change is real for everybody. It's a global crisis, no matter where you're in the world you're living. And in some ways, I would say that many of us in the developing world, in the global south, are feeling the impact of climate change without having been responsible for the levels of greenhouse gas emissions that have really fueled it. But we can't say it's not our fault, we're not going to do anything. We've got to act now. And whether it's reducing greenhouse gas emissions through having effective waste management, which improves air quality, which improves the lives of our people, whether it's that or it's planting trees, we have to respond.
Yeah. So, Ricardo, you were going to answer something on that one.
Yes, just to say first to start that climate change is nothing abstract at all. And once again, wherever you are dealing with phenomena that are connected with these changes that we are suffering. For instance, in Braga, 4 years ago, in the middle of October, when we were supposed to have the beginning of autumn, there were so high temperatures that we had a lot of forest fires in the surroundings of the city that threatened a lot of inhabitations. Unfortunately, we had no great serious occurrence, but it was a very challenging time by then. We all deal with flooding in the water courses. And for instance, you mentioned the Global Parliament of Mayors. We are currently developing a very interesting initiative worldwide in which we call for local mayors to have a specific role also in climate change adaptation because of the impact of the rise of sea level in the urban migration. That's something that has a huge impact in many countries because people are obviously being torn apart off the coast and moving into the cities to run away from those challenges. And so there are concrete threats that we can find in each of the territories that we have to deal with right now.
Yeah, and another question in the chat, anyone can answer, is the business community taking it as seriously as they should in your cities or whatever? Anyone want to answer anything on that? You know, Pakwesi, for example, is the business community interested in what you're doing, or is the business community in Sierra Leone or Freetown saying, yes, we want to partner with you, we'll help you with some new innovations we're developing?
I think most of the businesses that are producing plastic bottles for consumption are currently actually making it in a way that is environmentally degradable and recyclable for us to use. This is one way in which the business community supports it. For instance, the tree planting session we just had was largely funded by private funds within our country. So basically, they are trying to play an active role in supporting the environmental fight for climate.
Right. Anyone else want to answer that? Or should we just assume that they're slowly understanding all of these topics?
No, just brief notes, if you allow me, Charles. Here in Braga, we have different types of collaboration. Actually, most of the companies are on their own committed with sustainability issues. They have their own sustainability plans that they try to bring to their own activity. But on top of that, we have, for instance, something that is very important and that we haven't spoken much yet, which is the citizens' awareness for these topics. And for instance, we have here a lot of projects that are developed by the municipality in which we challenge cities to participate and in which companies try to bring their own workers to have a role on that. For instance, we have initiatives on reforestation. We have initiatives on cleaning the rivers. And for instance, in working schools for efficient use of energy. And in all those topics, there's always a role for fostering the sustainable mobility and to have specific initiatives to incentivize their workers for sharing cars, for using public transport or other initiatives. And there are specific areas in which all the companies are participating as well.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought up that thing about the activation of citizens who perhaps many of the initiatives are also perhaps coming up from the grassroots. I mean, Yvonne, are any initiatives in your country sort of being pushed up by the grassroots and knocking on your door and saying, Yvonne, Mayor, please do this? Is that ever happening?
Yeah, absolutely. It's private sector, but it's also community-based organizations and community individuals. A constant sort of request for support has. Or no, I'll put it this way: an engagement, a very strong collaboration exists between us as a city government and the Slum Dwellers Association, and they drive and we drive. They come up with ideas and we partner with them. We come up with ideas and they partner with us, and that would be, so. Along our coastline, there's a real need for restoration of mangroves and the prevention of continuous banking into the ocean, which is a way of again, this growth of the informal settlements, growth of slums because of a lack of development control. And that partnership is one where it's very mutual. It's coming from those who understand the risks that are created by them, by this method of growth of community, because they live it, they live there, they live through it, they've seen it. And similarly with community cleanups, we have demand for trees, we have demand for the forestation projects. So yeah, I think it really is two-way. And the private sector, just to quickly say on that, private sector do recognize the risks. And have Transform Freetown is actually predicated on us all, the whole city, all sectors of the city being involved, and they've been playing their role. There's more to do. There's more for all of us to do.
So I got a funny gong going on in the background, which says that we're reaching the sort of end of our session. I mean, I suppose some of the conclusions are that great city making, great nation making is a collective endeavor, is sort of one thing that I'm hearing. The other thing is, it's not the city itself that's the issue, it's how they're planned, designed, managed and governed, which is really the central question. And that this, what I'm hearing as well, it requires this sort of political commitment, courage. I think courage is very important, ambition to make the real change, and engaging everyone from ordinary citizens to the business community as well. And so that everybody becomes part of being a maker, shaper, co-creator of this evolving place. And I think what struck me also is that one needs a story to tell, the story of the tree planting, the story of the vision of Lao, the story of Braga's vision, and so on. So I suppose the summary is, because we want to look at it in glass half full ways, is the transition can be an opportunity rather than a threat. I know that sounds a bit simplistic, but I think the energy that you're all expressing gives us all hope. So can I thank you all individually for your participation? And I know it's all very complex in this digital world. You saw it at the beginning, these complexities. But anyway, we're all together here. We all had a chat and I really enjoyed it. So thank you very much, everyone. And see you soon.